Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's alumni speaker event. We're happy to see so many people in the room today, and welcome to everyone watching online. Today's event will feature a 45-minute keynote, followed with a brief Q&A period. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to recognize that this event is a result of a collaborative effort by the Engineering Society, the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, the Queen's Conference on Business and Technology, the Queen's Innovation Connector, and the Queen's Student Alumni Association. Together, these groups have created an opportunity to connect students to the Queen's global alumni network. I would now like to introduce Dean Kim Woodhouse from the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science to say a few words on behalf of the university.
So welcome everyone. On behalf of Principal Wolf and Queen's University, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Michele and to her family who have flown in from Calgary, Winnipeg, and all parts from San Francisco, I think, yesterday. And welcome to all of you. This is going to be, I think, a very exciting event. I've known Michele for a few years now, and she always gives extremely wonderful talks. And so welcome, and again, on behalf of the university, this is going to be a great event.
Hi everyone. So my name is Taylor Sawadsky and I'm the Engineering Society President. Michele Romanow, who during her time at campus was heavily engaged in campus life. She was Chief Rec and Vice President of the Engineering Student Society Council of Ontario. Michele was also one of the founders of the Tea Room and was the sole recipient of the Tricolor Award in 2007. After graduating with a civil engineering degree in 2007, Michele stayed at Queen's to complete her MBA in 2008. Since leaving campus, Michele has gone on to successfully launch 4 companies, including Buytopia and SnapSaves, a mobile couponing app which was purchased by Groupon in 2014. Michele is on the list of the 100 most powerful women in Canada and is among the top 20 most disruptive millennials on a mission, according to Forbes. Michele is now also a dragon for the CBC show Dragon's Den. Michele now returns to campus as this year's recipient of the Queen's University Alumni Association's One to Watch Award. Without any further ado, please welcome Michele.
Than we do at CBC, so this is like confusing me a bit. I'm sorry, can we just like look at the setup? Like I have never had a throne. Like, like this is as good as it gets. I think that, I guess you guys want me to sit? I think that they wanted, I was on crutches as of 2 days ago, so they had a place for me to sit. So let's just get a gauge of the room really quickly. Who's in first year? Second year? Third year, 4th year, 5th year or more? That's awesome. And who in the room wants to be an entrepreneur? Oh yeah, that's the best showing. That's what I want to talk about today. So I'll leave a bunch more time than they suggested for Q&A because I always think that's really where you get the meat. I have a pretty open book. I believe in telling stories as they are, not how people would like to hear them. And so I think that's what I'm going to do with you guys today. Today I wanted to share, sorry, I'm still getting used to a throne, just a second. I wanted to share what my story was really like, how I got started at Queen's. I think it's so easy, and I hear so many narratives. It's like, look, I went to school, I wanted to change the world, I did 2 things, and then like magically I built this huge thing. And in my experience, it was never like that. It was much messier than that. It was much more surprising, and it was certainly much more difficult. So I think it's kind of fun to share those stories. And when I think about sharing those stories, I think about, you know, if I was sitting in your shoes right now, what I would have told myself at your age, and what I would have wished I would have known. And so I think the first thing that I would have told myself is that building a business is really scrappy, really messy, that I would have to roll up my sleeves and get really scrappy to make things work and to get things started. I think the second thing that I would have told myself is that I needed to stop planning and I just needed to start going, that it was so easy, and academics teach you that so much planning is involved, where in reality, all of my success came from just going and actually doing it. And then the third thing is that I would just tell myself to be brave, that it seems like there's a lot to be scared of, but in actuality, it was just all about getting started and getting going. So I'll bring you guys back to Queens. So I was here, I started in 2003. So that's a little more than 10 years ago. So by first year engineering, I had figured out that I was probably not going to be a great lifetime engineer. I could study, and I worked really hard, and I kind of horsepowered my way into some grades, but it wasn't natural, and it wasn't something that I knew I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So by my second year, I was like, okay, I got to figure out something else that I want to do. I had grown up in an oil and gas family. I knew a ton about resources, so being naive at 19 years old, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a sustainable business. I'm going to take a super high margin business like coffee and see if we can make it totally sustainable, and see if I can prove that sustainable businesses are even possible. And so that was in my second year, and when this all started, everyone was saying no. The biggest thing I heard all day long for 2 years was no. Stop making fun of me, my family in the front row. I see you guys. All I heard was no, and I heard them, and what I saw is that we came in, and the first thing the Queens told us is like, we can't do this because we have this exclusivity agreement with Sodexo. They're the only people that can open food services on this campus, so you can't possibly open a food service on campus. So I was like, no, that's not true, because there's the common ground and there's other food services, and so you have to be able to let students operate a business. And they said, no, those are special exceptions that were granted a long time ago, like we can't do that again. And they kept saying no, and I kept coming back with a different reason. And then I came back with a different reason, and finally I said, look, we're not even opening a food service here. We're here opening a sustainable business that happens to be a food service. And it's funny, because that should be really the same thing. But with enough persistence, it was enough to take those no's and make them into yeses. And that, I think, is the first thing you learn about being scrappy, is that it's so important to get out there and to never stop trying, and to never stop trying to take all those no's that you're going to hear, because you're going to spend 90% of your time hearing no and figure out how to make that into yes. So the second thing that happened after that is we opened the tea room. I had some great initial success. I'm still super grateful for Queens for giving me that responsibility, or that possibility and the autonomy to do that. I had met two friends in my engineering undergrad, Ryan Marion, who had the top marks in chemical engineering. He was way smarter than I was, and Anatoly Melnichuk, who was also in civil with me. And I remember Anatoly coming up to me in civil class, like we were sitting in the back, and he's like, well, you're not working on work right now. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm entering this business plan competition. And he's like, well, why are you doing that? And I was like, well, you win $15,000 of cash if you win this. And I want to build this tea room, and we need the money, and so I just figured I'd do this. And he goes, they're giving you cash? And I was like, yeah, if we win, and we get I think the Queens one at the time was $15,000. The Western one was $25,000. I feel like hopefully we rectified that at this point. But I was like, this is pretty good, and we could do a bunch of these. And he goes, well, that's crazy. So Anatoly, who's not known to be a morning riser, gets up at 9 in the morning, and he shows up and he comes watch this and he goes, we can win one of these. So the tea room didn't win this year, but after that, and after we'd opened the tea room, I spent the next 8 months playing one game with these two colleagues. And the game that we played every single day was, what's the next $1 million idea? And we went through everything. I mean, we went through custom-made suits that were imported from China and customized here before Indochino existed. Ryan was working on a PLA plastics project because we wanted to biodegrade plastic bottles that were water bottles so people could throw them out. That's actually now a technology that's used in lots of cool places. But I remember we were in the ILC trying to run that experience if we could start a bottled water company. It's kind of silly. And so finally, after looking at all these businesses, we landed on fish farming. So like you're supposed to laugh now, because that's ridiculous. And so, you know, we had good reason, right? The natural supply of sturgeon. This all started out because Anatoly, we were like, why don't we grow a forest? And if we grow a forest of really expensive trees, we can make really expensive furniture. Like, this is how out there we were in these buildings with like brainstorming ideas. Like there was no idea that was off limits. There was nothing that we weren't willing to do. I think one of the best things that's been told to me is that successful people do what unsuccessful people weren't willing to do. When we started the tea room, I stuck my hands in like this giant composter full of worms, and I was like, this is the composting future, right? It was nothing that we weren't willing to do. So back to the forest story, Anatoly's like, let's make these forests for trees, and then he goes, well, if we're gonna grow a forest, we should grow the most expensive farm-raised product, which is caviar. And so we started doing some research. We're like, wow, the caviar market could be kind of interesting. And what we discovered really quickly is that the worldwide supply of caviar had decreased by 95%. And that's because we had overfished the Caspian Sea. People had been exporting caviar out of Russia forever. And so we had this like amazing graph that's like, here we were in 1980s, and like here we are with supply today. And so if we're really that low on supply, and if this is really the world's oldest luxury product, you know, there's got to be a business here. So I still remember we were in Stauffer, and we started looking up phone numbers of like famous American chefs. And so we called the French Laundry, and we got Thomas Keller on the phone, which is still crazy that this happened to this day. And I said, so can you tell me why you don't have caviar on your menu? And he goes, do you have any? And I said, well, this is crazy, because like I'm a student calling from Stauffer Library. Like, of course, like, of course I don't have any caviar. But if you can't get it, then obviously there'll probably be a demand for this. So off we went, and I mean really, really off we went. We discovered there was a professor at the University of Florida who knew everything about sturgeon, caviar, and fish. We became an expert in fish. I remember we did all these projects about the physical infrastructure needed to build all these different tanks. We spent hours in Stauffer Library building. We had an 80-page business plan, 80 pages, and like a 20-tab Excel model. Like this was so extensive. And from there, we started doing exactly what we had set out, which is we started doing business plans. So we did the first one, which was Queens. We won Queens, so that was our first $15,000. And we kept going, and we won 6 of them that year. So that means we graduated with like $120,000. We were like, this is great. I guess we have to go start this business now. So we were still in the position, though, where we wanted to build a caviar farm, which would take all the price of setting up a farm, which was like $6 million. And we were 21 years old at the time, so no one was going to give, you know, some 21-year-old $6 million who had never sold caviar. So we needed another solution around this. And so what we did is we figured out that there was a natural supply of sturgeon that hadn't been fished for a very long time for a variety of different reasons in the East Coast. So I still remember I called my parents and I told them that I had just graduated engineering, and now I had graduated my MBA, and I had $100,000 of education or something exorbitant, and I was going to go fishing. And they're like, why? Why are you doing this? But we drove out there in an old beat-up Camry, and what we needed to figure out, so there was a natural supply of sturgeon out there, but the licenses had been grandfathered. So there was only 5 people in the province of New Brunswick that were still alive that still had a license to fish sturgeon. So we had to find these 5 people. So naturally what I did is I called fisheries and I said, well, you have to give me the names of the 5 people that have these sturgeon fishing licenses. And the first woman's like, absolutely not, that's like confidential proprietary information. So then we would like call back from like different numbers with different names until we like finally got like a receptionist like didn't know what time it was, and we were like, she just like gave me all 5 names, and I was like, great. So now I had the names of like the 5 people with this license, but I didn't know how to get a hold of them. So I remember we went to the phone book. I mean, this is 2008, there's still a phone book. And I had to call every Elmer Dixon in the province of New Brunswick. So we go through the phone book and we call the first one and we're like, hi, is this the Elmer with the sturgeon fishing license? Most people are like, no. This is the weirdest commercial call to my house ever. So finally, I got Elmer on the phone, and I'm gearing up for this big negotiation. And every fish was worth between $5,000 and I mean the biggest fish are worth like $15,000. Like these are really valuable when you pull them out of the water. And so I was saying in the back of my head, okay, I can rent a license for $5,000 a day. That was kind of like my benchmark. So I said, Elmer, we got to know each other. He was like 74 years old. He's like, yeah, I have this license, but I like haven't fished under it in 20 years, but there's a lot of fish out there, and like you'd have to get someone to fish under my license. And I was like, no, I got that part, that's cool. And he goes, well, no one's ever called me for this. And so I go, Elmer, what do you want for me to rent this license for you? And he goes, for you, ma'am, how about $500 for the summer? I said, Elmer, we have a deal. It was crazy. So off we went. We found a fisherman. We bought a fishing boat. And we actually went out there every day. Our fishermen went out there every day and we found fish. We figured out how to get CFIA food processing approval. We figured out how to ship our product. So we would basically like catch a fish in the morning. We would pull it out, take it to like a processing facility. Like we were really, really gritty. Like this did not start off glamorous at all. We would process the fish. The way the economics worked is that the meat of the fish would cover all of your costs, and then every jar of caviar, and in a typical fish there was like 200 to 400 jars, would sell for $200. So then we would get on the phone and start calling restaurants across Canada and be like, hey, we like just caught this fish, and like, did you want any? So it was a pretty fun process. And by the end of the summer, we had figured out actually how to make a pretty great business from this. So here we were. Now we were three 22-year-olds who had figured out how to sell caviar, that there was the market for this. We had figured out how to get it. We didn't have a huge natural wild supply. And here we were in the fall of 2008. So now not only had the whole world gone into a recession and no one was buying luxury products, but we lost our ability to export the product because we knew Canada wasn't a big enough market. And so this was probably one of the most important parts of my career when I realized that all the planning in the world couldn't save me. Like the 80-page business plan and the 20-tab Excel model and every single business plan competition that told us that this was the best business, that was so cool, that we had everything right, that wouldn't make up for the execution that we needed and what that would tell us. So the third time, I guess, and now it's Tea Room, now it's Caviar, so the third time we started a business, we did it totally different. So I was working at Sears at the time. I was the director of strategy. I was seeing e-commerce blow up, and we decided that we would launch a competitor to Groupon. So that, like, our business plan was launch an e-commerce site. The first pillar of the business plan was get the website outsourced. The second pillar of the business plan was have a famous person tweet for us. And the third pillar of the business plan was to launch at a trade show. And this is what happened. We got to the trade show, and we realized that the developers that we had outsourced hadn't actually built the website. So I really appreciate how funny this is now being in tech. But the website that we launched with was a picture of a website. So it was a JPEG. Like the links at the bottom, like nothing worked. It was a picture of a website, and one button worked, and that was the buy button, and the buy button took you to a PayPal page. That was the website. And the famous person tweeted for us, but that did nothing. But we launched at this trade show, and we actually made $10,000 of sales in our first weekend. And from there, I never would have guessed we would have grown to be one of the quickest growing e-commerce retailers in Canada. So it was really a story about learning that it wasn't planning that mattered, it was execution that mattered. And it was getting out of this mindset that everything needs to be written and proofed and run through a model, that you could get so much of that information, especially with technology, by doing it today. So again, I don't believe in planning, but I do believe in curiosity and iteration. So I also believe that you start a company not by telling everyone you're starting a company. You always say you're starting a project, which is why it's so awesome to start a business while you're at school and while you're doing this today, because you have, infrastructure, and you have a support network, and you have all these professors that are willing to help you. I think the next thing is that I had to be deeply curious. If you take away one thing away from this presentation, remember one line, which is you can call anyone in this world and say, hey, I'm a student doing a research project and I have some questions for you. And still to this day, I probably still use that line when trying to get, still a student, always a student. I still use that line trying to get, trying to understand new businesses, trying to understand if this is an opportunity worth pursuing, because the best information always comes out of people's mouths. It never, ever happens online. You can do all the Google research in the world, and you just have to call one person that runs a similar style business, and they will be the ones that are telling you about that. So then, beyond that, you need to just keep iterating. You need to learn that you got to try something, and then you learn what worked, and then you keep going. I always say on the Den, like for every one business you've heard of that may have been successful that I started, there was 5 that failed. My parents are here today, and I don't even think they could list all the projects that didn't do very well in their minds. And it was so funny because, so we're filming Dragon's Den, and the way the show works is that people come down into the den, and we know nothing about them before they come on. So we don't know what their ideas are. We don't get to do background research. We don't get to do any of that. And so, the 3rd day we're filming, it's my first season last year, the producers pull me over and they go like, Michele, are you getting like insider info? And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, are you getting someone to like feed you the pitches so you can research them in advance? And I was like, no, like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, you know everything about all of these businesses. Like, you know their competitors, and you know the questions to ask, and you know everything about like all these like random spaces. And I go, well, the joke is I've like tried to start half of these businesses before. So like, of course I know, because I failed doing it. But I think that's important, because it's important to remember that you have to try, and you have to try lots and lots of things. And actually, just because I've been successful once or twice previously, it doesn't actually mean that my new ideas are always successful today. So I think that the last thing that I would tell people is that, and if I was to talk to myself, I would just say to not be scared. That you have to like move. It's always so scary to feel like you're starting a business, you're starting something from new. And what I hear from students all the time is like, I want to take this path that someone else is giving them. Like, I'm not going to do this because I like need to get this degree and I need to get this level of work experience, and then I can like go do something, and like finally I'll go start something later. And I think all of those rules are incorrect. I think that that's largely what corporations tell you so that you can stay in a job for a certain amount of time. You don't need to be somewhere for 2 years to learn something. You don't need, people say to me all the time, well, I have to do it because it's going to like look bad on my resume. And I'm like, look bad on your resume to who? Like, if you looked at my resume, it would make absolutely no sense. I went from a coffee shop to a fish company to an e-commerce website to a couponing app to a fintech company. Like, how did that make any sense when you piece it together that way? But when you tell the story of I was an entrepreneur and I was looking for the next opportunity, it always made sense. So I would never be scared of living your life for someone else or living your life for the reputation of how it's going to look on your resume. Remember, you always get to tell that narrative. It's no one else that gets to tell that narrative. And I used to think this fear went away. Like, I used to think that, as soon as I had grown a business, it would be easier. As soon as I had sold a business, it would be easier. As soon as I had raised money, it would be easier. But in fact, you have that same anxiety every day being an entrepreneur, of being scared if things are going to work or if things are just going to fail, because it's always that fragile balance. So as a lot of you probably know, Bytopia got to grow to one of the largest group buying websites. It's actually still run by my third partner, Anatoly. We've grown to about 3 million subscribers and got to work with a ton of super cool brands. And the real cool moral of the story is that all started, and we self-funded the whole business from the last $15,000 that was left in the Avondale Caviar bank account. And from there, we started a mobile couponing app. We knew that users were interested in that, and so we cranked it out. We got a ton of the big consumer packaged goods companies on board, and 8 months later, we sold the company to Groupon. And so everyone's like, that's amazing, you started a company, and 8 months later, you sold it. And I always tell people, well, it took 8 years to get my 8-month exit, so it wasn't quite that fast. And so I think that the last thing that I would tell people is that I think entrepreneurship has always been worth it, because it has afforded me opportunities that I don't think anyone else in any other career path would have ever given me. You know, I remember in the early days before the recession, one of our restaurants bought our caviar and served it to Warren Buffett. I think Warren Buffett likes Coca-Cola and has no taste for this, but I thought that was a pretty cool experience. I never thought that I would be the youngest dragon on Dragon's Den. I never thought that I would be asked to be on a public board. But that all happened because, you know, there was risk taken early, and I was willing to fail. And I was just willing to keep getting up and keep trying again, because there's no question that I've certainly had way more failures than successes. So if I leave you with anything today, it's hopefully to understand that my story wasn't very glamorous for most of it. It was very messy along the way, and that it was just a lot of scrappiness that got me through. The second thing I would leave you with is that, you know, do a little bit of planning, do a little bit of research, call a few competitors, but really just get going. The magic you guys have today that I never had was the iPhone came out when I was leaving Queens. And so now the ability to develop things and learn to develop things quickly is just there. And the last thing I would leave you with is to not be scared, to just get going and to get started, especially while you're here as students today. So thank you so much, and I encourage any questions.
Inspiring to hear your journey and how you found your own way to success.
Awesome.
And I think I can speak for everyone here when we say that we are so grateful to hear from a leader in the entrepreneurial space that's from our very own alumni network. So thank you so much. And now we have some time for questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and there's some people around the room that will bring a microphone to you.
Thanks so much for your presentation. I guess my quick question is, you say that you've had some success, you've also had some failure. When you fail, it can be really, really, really tough. You can kind of feel like you're kind of beaten when you're down. How do you deal with, can you tell us about a time that you almost couldn't move forward, and how did you move forward? I guess what tools did you use? Keep going.
Sounds like an interview question. Tell me about a time. Isn't there like a structure for this? There's like 4 things you do or something. So I remember, first of all, the great part is I had great partners. I think I've always worked with like incredible co-founders throughout my my career. And so I think that the first thing is that balance keeps you really grounded, because you know when one person's really demotivated, the other person's like willing to pull a bit more. And so I think between us and between the team, that was like super important, that we weren't going to give up, that we were going to keep exploring things, that we were going to keep being curious about things. I can remember, you know, that the year that I had finished school, we had run this caviar business, we had this great success, we had a ton of great press, and then it was like in 2008, everything was dead. And we tried to start all sorts of businesses then. We tried to start a business that like delivered fruit to office companies. We tried to like I delivered fruit myself, all of these things we tried. And I think that it was ultimately like, we just had to like keep going and keep iterating on something, keep looking for other opportunities. And in that time, like the recession was so bad, we all took jobs for a year, right? Like I went to Sears for a year. I don't think there was anything wrong with that. And you know, 8 months in, we were already brainstorming what was our next thing. I think I started in January, and by September of that year, I was already coming home at 7 o'clock at night and working from 7 until 1 in the morning on this new startup that I was working on. And so I think it's just never losing that curiosity for what else is happening and what else is interesting, and having good people around you to keep motivating you.
Thank you so much, Michele. So on campus, entrepreneurship and innovation have sort of become buzzwords.
Yeah.
And there are so many companies that are being created that might not necessarily be the best opportunities, and people are starting companies just because. So how do you sort of cut through the noise, cut through the buzz around entrepreneurship to know what is really a great opportunity to become part of?
Like in what sense? In the sense of like things you should join or things you should start or things, what are you talking about?
As a business, like how do you know that something is a good business opportunity as opposed to, I guess, just a startup for being the sake of a startup?
That's a good question. There's tons of venture capitalists that spend their whole life devoted to like a zillion different philosophies on what makes a good business. I would look for a couple of things. I always look for spaces that are growing, because even if you're in a growing space and if you end up somewhere, you're better off than going somewhere where things are collapsing. Like it's, if someone's telling you to start a newspaper and every single newspaper is in decline, like you're going to be in a super rough position. Then you're looking for some sort of revenue model that can make sense even if you grow. It's really tough, especially when you're starting your first business. When you have no track record, it's even harder to raise money than when you do have a track record. And so when you start early, you want to start with a business that's ambitious enough, but not something that to get started you need to raise $1 million for, because you want to be able to show that even with limited experience, you've gotten that traction. So I mean, you're looking for a revenue model where, it's like simple, right? You buy something for $5, you sell it for $10, you see if you can do that 100 times over, and like, then it's like, at least if this fails, you can have cash flow to sustain you while you're looking for an investor or other opportunities to grow your team. And then the last thing is you're looking for a great team. That all being said, like, this is the time to experiment. Like, you're in school, don't overthink things anything too much. Like, even if you do a project and it's like a giant failure, you'll still learn an absolute ton at this stage. But those are kind of, 3 things I would think about. And then probably the third thing after that is you're looking for how do you create an unfair advantage, and how do you cut through everyone else that's in the competitive set to be truly unique. But that's kind of how I would think about that. And it's so interesting because like 10 years ago, no one at Queen's was talking about startups. Like everyone thought we were super weird for not like going to take a job after we graduated. Like it was a totally different culture that wasn't ingrained. So it's actually, I think it's really cool that we're starting to see more and more of that embraced.
Okay, so you talked a bit about some of the developments and learnings and teachings that you've had in business over the years. My question is, kind of behind the scenes, for yourself personally, what are some of the growths, the learnings, the teachings that you've had personally that have helped you persevere and be successful in business and in life?
Like the personal learn. Okay, there's a lot of ways to answer that question. Like you could answer so many versions of that question. I think that for me there was like a really big learning curve where I remember that my like only method to solve problems for like a long time in my life was to like insert more of my working hours. Like my solution to like not solving a problem was like I'll just work harder and sleep less, and like sleep not at all, and like just keep going. And it was like a very important, and it was probably like around like the Queen's to like my first business transition where I had to like realize that that's really not smart. Like you can't clone yourself, and you can't just burn yourself out forever, and you have to be doing things that matter and make a difference, like that are moving your business forward. And so and this was one of the benefits of working with other co-founders is like we constantly we were super simple when we started out. I mean, we were at Queen's. We decided we were going to split this company up a third. Every lawyer would tell us we were stupid. We'd never had a shareholders agreement until we stole the company. Like it's probably very risky, but we figured that, if we had known each other for that long, we would have screwed each other a long time ago, And so I think that part of that was that we just had this network where we kept learning and we held each other really, really accountable. And so we could always have that discussion where it's like, man, Michele, you're not pulling your weight. Like, what have you done that's generated revenue lately? Like, what have you done to bring this forward lately? And it never felt like it was a castle that we had built that we were just there forever. It was like every single day there had to be a challenge and we had to keep ourselves accountable for building something better. And I think that structure just created a lot of good in our environment because we kept it really competitive with the three of us. And sometimes it got pretty heated because we would get really angry when people hadn't been pulling their weight for a long time. But that also drove a lot of, especially in the early days, just that momentum that we needed to go from like students at Queen's that knew like nothing about nothing to like becoming more and more successful. Yeah. Or I was, go ahead, I guess there's microphone, sorry. Mm-hmm.
It seems like that a lot of the success of your business came from the strength of your business partners. My question is, what do you look for in a fellow co-founder? I'm also wondering if that's similar to what you look for in American today.
It's a good question. So now's I don't know what it would be like to, like, okay, so what I look for on Dragon's Den is, I think that, as I was talking about in my speech, I think that ideas are always iterative. Like, you never start with the right idea. You start with like an okay idea, and then you test it, and then something works, and you take the part that works, and you just keep doing that. And so that process just takes so much like grit and determination that I always look for the entrepreneur on Dragon's Den that's not going to give up. Because I'm not really betting on your first idea. As much as I'd like to think, and it's like so comforting to think that like this is the idea and this is gonna work, like you don't know that. Like the market could change, your team could change, you could lose a big deal, like that would all change. What I'm really betting on is you. And I need to know that you as the entrepreneur have this like incredible desire to want to win. And that comes from all different places. Sometimes it comes from having very little to start off with. Then you have no option because if you lose, you have nowhere else to go. And so that has created an extraordinary amount of success. Sometimes it's, you know, there's just a person with a chip on their shoulder and they're so out there to like prove the world wrong. Those generally personality types have made incredible entrepreneurs. And I think that when I looked at my co-founders, you know, we had one of us that had to make it. There was no question that there was like no other options for him. And there was, you know, one of us that had like a serious chip on our shoulder about being academically smart. And the other one just like had a chip on our shoulder to make it. But it was we all wanted to get to the same place, and it wasn't always for the exact same reason, but we all wanted to get to the same end goal, which made it kind of a good partnership.
Hi, Michele. It was nice to hear you. I have a
Sorry, put up your hand. There you are.
if someone wants to start a business which is already exists, there are lots of players who are doing that, and I mean, if it is somebody's passion, so what you would like to suggest them?
If you want to start a business in a competitive marketplace?
Yeah, and it is already there. I mean, it's not a new idea, it's already there, lots of big companies doing that, so if somebody starts, they will be starting from scratch, so what you would like to suggest?
You have to grow some sort of edge. And the thing is that a startup should never really succeed. They only succeed because big companies are so slow, and they have so much to lose by taking some of the risks that are very, very easy to do in startups. And so you have to think of, you know, in the world of CPGs, they're doing all of these different things, but there's 5 things that they can't do fast enough. And so what are those 5 things for me to launch a company in that space? Because if you're just going to go and start an exact same commodity business, unless you have like a super specialized market, like in a geography that doesn't have access, or one of these small things, you need to look for something else that will give you the edge to succeed. Hi.
Thanks for the talk today. It's really good. I have a 3-part question. First is,
Got it.
who's the celebrity that you asked to tweet?
Okay.
Second would be, what's a company, name a company that you're out there that you're following right now that you're really fired up about? Maybe someone you've seen on the den or something like that.
Okay.
And then you've talked about forecasting ideas and trying to find the next big thing.
Yeah.
Just wondering what your thoughts are on e-commerce. What's the next big thing in e-commerce? Maybe 5 years from now, how do you see us buying products? Things like that.
Those are very good questions. Those are very good three-part questions. So the easy ones, first one, the celebrity was Devin Soltendieck, who was like the Much Music VJ, and he had a pretty decent following at that time. And the only reason we knew him is that he went to high school with Ryan, my other co-founder. So he did it as a friends and family favor. That was the first question. Second question was about.
Just a company that you're kind of fired up about that you see.
Oh, company that we're kind of fired up about. There was a couple really cool ones on the Den this year. One of the cool ones was a company called Snowboard Addiction. It was a self-funded entrepreneur, a guy that had moved to Whistler 5 years ago from New Zealand. He's an incredible snowboarder and he's a super fun guy to watch. He videos on how to learn to snowboard. So when you Google how to snowboard, like he has 10 million views on YouTube, and most of the videos are him teaching you how to do certain things. And so he started a business where he was using that online traffic that he was getting for free from YouTube to sell subscriptions for media. Then he kind of figured out a couple years in that people don't want to buy media online. And so he started selling 2 simple e-commerce products, a balance board and like they're 2 things that you like use at home to like practice the motions of what it's like to snowboard. And he had grown the business into like $200,000 of yearly sales on his own. And so that was a super fun one that I was able to connect with. I think that in terms of e-commerce trends, there's still a lot to be done in last mile here and what it's going to be to get things instantly. Like now that I live in San Francisco, it's crazy. You can order almost anything under the sun that will arrive in your house from some location in an hour or less. And so thinking about how we're going to do that and who it's going to be economic for, and if that's only going to be Amazon, that's economic for. And then I think doing more and more around content and around building, right? And so you look at like the success of like House or anything that allows you to put different ideas and different pieces of content together, and then that leads to selling, I think is another big iteration we're going to see in e-commerce versus just like search and buy or just deal and buy. I don't know, mobile's already like 5 or 6 years into e-commerce, but if you look at the success of Wish, like it's just been extraordinary what they've been able to do on phones very quickly. But I think e-commerce generally is probably going to be in a rough place for the next couple of years. I think most of the new players have been the line one of the VCs used is like, he's like, see, when Nike makes a shoe for $12, they sell it for $400. When we make something in tech for $12, we sell it for $8. And then eventually that gravy train starts to run out. So there's lots of people in both the last mile delivery space and in the e-commerce space that are really pricing things below. Amazon has a ton of power to do that in the US, and so I think it will be a couple years to see pricing that properly shakes out. But for now, you're the consumer of it, so take advantage of it because you're probably buying things at 20% below cost.
Thank you very much.
I think I've got this. Okay. So my question is, first of all, thank you so much for the talk, Michele.
No worries.
If you were to leave your position at Groupon today and go into a startup, what industry excites you enough to just go into it right away? What would you call the company?
What would I call the company? I feel like this is a very leading question.
We're trying to get some free work out of you.
What would I call the company? Lucky enough, I just finished my term with Groupon 2 Fridays ago, so I just left, which is great news. And the space that I'm most excited about, that I'm already working on things and it hasn't come out publicly, is the fintech space. So I'm super excited on what's going to happen. Fintech is all financial technologies. So it's the last series of venture was everything that broke down the media world. It was tearing apart newspapers and all the conventional ways that we advertised, and that's largely what came out of social networks. And the next kind of big phase that a lot of people are talking about are what's tearing down banks and insurance companies and mutual funds and all of the financial institutions that are running, but they're running on completely antiquated systems and technology. Probably all of you here would never want to go into a branch. You would rather do it all on your phone. And that transition is happening faster than ever. So that's kind of the next thing that I'm super interested in.
Romanow Bank. Bank of Marv. Bank of Michele.
I don't know what to call it. Probably something in lowercase letters, because all tech companies apparently have to have lowercase letters. Yeah. I mostly lied. I'm not really, I remember that I had this great game that I could play with my age, where if I didn't tell people the year I went to undergrad, but I only told the people I did my MBA, they would assume I was 5 years older than I actually was. And this game worked pretty well, because I remember when I came to this director role at Streers, everyone was 30 and I was 22, and I was like, these people are I'm living in a condo with a roommate, and everyone here has a real house with a family. And it was just it was a very big difference. And so, it wasn't directly lying, but I certainly didn't make people aware of my age. I didn't think that was to my advantage. I did a ton of research and preparation to make sure that I was ready for things, and then I just let people make their own assumptions with how old I was based on my knowledge, versus having to get to this point where it's well, you're only 21, and this whole that never ended well. So you just stand up on your own merits and don't make it too apparent.
Hello, Michele.
Yeah.
I'm an international student, and I would like to ask you a very specific question from an international student point of view. So Queen is known for her international diversity, and can you imagine your life as a third-year international civil engineering student, have some education alone, you don't have a rich background, and you have an idea, tech idea, let's say. And you know that the tech industry is very ruthless and hard. How will you proceed on that time to put your level of success, and will you be standing here without being Canadian as an international, you're standing here or sitting here and doing the talk?
So sorry, that's the question. What should you do, or what would have I done if I was in your shoes?
My question is, if you are an international student,
Yep.
without having any rich background,
Yeah.
how you will target the success in the tech industry?
So the first thing that you should know is that half of the people in Silicon Valley are from very international backgrounds and are first generation, and there is an extraordinary amount of success that hasn't come from Americans. There's a really solid Canadian mafia in the Valley. So I think that shouldn't deter you. And what I would encourage you is to see if you can start now while you're still in school and use some of your spare time to start running tests and pilots to see if you have an idea. So you're not graduating in the place where you're worried about a ton of student debt and the inability to make income. You're actually seeing if you can get a business off the ground now, which is part of what I did while I was in school.
Michele.
Hi.
You talked earlier about the importance of execution over planning. Is there, in the tech space in particular, do you see a number one mistake that tech startups make? And if so, what is it?
The number one mistakes tech companies make? The number one mistakes tech companies make is pursuing business models for too long with no revenue model. You cannot do things forever for free. You can maybe do things forever for 3 years for a long time if you raise a bunch of money and you're a second or third time founder. But if you don't have any positive unit economics, if you're losing money on every time you do something and then trying to scale that, it's really, really hard to do that. And my mentality is if people aren't willing to pay the real price of something, then you're not really testing the right things anyways, right? It's like if you give away $1 bills for 85 cents, you should be able to do that forever, right? Like someone will take your $1 bill for 85 cents. It's can you do that at a profit? And this happens all the time in tech where it's just like, wow, we'll get a bunch of customers on board, we'll see if it all works, and then we'll really scale up and the unit economics will correct itself. And so I think I've always been of the mind, like we ran a self-funded e-commerce company, so we had to have a margin on every single product we made. And so you see that a lot in the tech space. It doesn't mean you need a revenue model the first day. It doesn't mean you need it instantly. You can still have awesome user engagement, and if you have people engaging, you can figure those things out a little bit later, but you have to have some level of roadmap for that.
Michele, since you've started so many businesses, I was just wondering, what are the skills that you need to start a business versus scaling a business? Like, how do you keep growing your skill set as your business grows?
So the first skill set you need is starting, because the scaling, by the time you get to scale, you get to like hire people around you that know a little bit more about scaling than you do, and you actually keep doing some of the same things but at a bigger scale, right? Like some of the things that scared me early on is like, how do I hire 6 people at a time and not worry that that's gonna like totally destroy my business or my ability to like pay those people? How do you take much bigger bets on the businesses you're placing? But I think that at this age, it's like so important to get the starting skill set, because you can get people along the way that can help you scale, that are really, really good at it. And as soon as you have a business that's successful, it's actually, I think, a lot easier to find those people than find the people that can start.
Hi, Michele. Thank you for giving this talk. My question is, did your engineering degree provide you with skills that made you a better entrepreneur? If so, what are those skills?
I like how you wrote down the question on your phone. That's like, yeah, no, that's good. So now I forgot the question. Skills that I took from engineering that made me a successful entrepreneur? That was the question? So I think that the number one thing engineering provided me was like fluidity and confidence with numbers. And I think that was like so important. It's like a skill I use every day. It's a skill that I see people in meetings all the time they get like confused with like ratios, and you're going really fast, and people use it as like a very successful negotiating technique. And so I think that like it was that confidence around, you know, could I build a model? Could I understand how to solve a problem? Could I, like you've sat in engineering classes, like there are days you sit there and you're like, I'm understanding like half of what you're teaching me, right? Like, can I take a really big concept and break it down and do that? And the big secret is that I'd say businesses are like 5 times more simple than most things you learn in engineering. Like engineering is really complicated, the way you have to put it together and the way you have to understand concepts and formulas. And so in some ways, you know, and it has to be exact in a lot of times in engineering. In business, it's like, okay, so if we like, you know, kind of make $10, and if you have about $5 of cost, we still have enough margin, right? And as long as like those numbers are like plus or minus 20% of them, we'll still be okay within a margin of error. And so I think that, you know, it was like being okay with solving big abstract problems and getting a really good fluidity around numbers, and learn to use Excel really well. That is like an amazing skill that like will serve absolutely everyone well if you take any other tiny technical skill out of engineering.
Wonderful. So we have time for one more question here.
Okay, well, can we just do those 3? Because there's like, we'll do the 3. Because they were all like, they're all waiting. We'll do 3 real fast.
Hi, Michele. I'm Trent.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about what you think about crowdfunding?
So I don't know that much. I think that crowdfunding, so crowdfunding, the way that I'm thinking about it now is the ability to pre-sell a product. So you go on Kickstarter, you say, we're about to create this product. We're going to allow you to pre-buy the product. You're not buying any equity in the company. You're literally pre-buying the product, and hopefully you get the product a year later. That's like an amazing thing that all entrepreneurs should do. That's like an amazing thing to do while you're at Queen's, because you have the resources. You probably have some person in film that can help you make the video and put it all together. And that gives you a super good litmus of, do people want the product? Because they're truly like putting their credit card down saying like, I like this enough that I would buy this. Like, it's really easy to forget the old model of doing that was like building a product from scratch, having it produced in China, importing it into Canada, putting it into a store, and then you discovered if a customer wanted it or not. Like, this is just so amazing that you can get such a good litmus off just doing a crowdfunded campaign. The second part of your question is probably the government is changing rules around if you can do this and get equity in companies. The last thing that I heard from the lawyers is that they haven't made the rules any easier, and we're a long ways away from that. It's pretty silly. That should be like so for those of you that don't know, you can't invest in a company unless you're a private accredited investor, which eliminates, everyone without a certain amount of income or a certain amount of savings to start investing, which is kind of silly. And so anyway, those laws need to be overhauled, and hopefully that will happen soon, but I don't think they've gotten any better. But in terms of pre-selling products, I would 100% do it in terms of an entrepreneur, and I say it all the time on the Den. It's like, have you seen if people want this product? And the only way to see if what people want this product is to try and sell this product.
So you let me work with people, grads from Waterloo, from Queens, different schools.
Yeah.
I'm actually a Waterloo student, so.
It's okay, my boyfriend is a Waterloo grad, so we have a really healthy back and forth on this issue.
Okay, so I'm part of the co-op program, and
yeah.
I'm involved with that. So coming here, I think the weekend, I see my brothers are involved with clubs, design teams, all that, so they kind of get their experience in a more open environment. So
yeah.
How do you working with these different people, how do you rate the experiences in terms of the skills that they bring?
Whoa, that's a loaded gun there. I just got the eyes. Okay, I think let's start here. Co-op is really important, not for learning things, for learning what you don't want to do. Like, it is so important to figure out that you don't like working on an auto assembly line, even though you loved cars and that was your jam, right? It's like that, and to see all of those different things. And so Queens doesn't offer that, but they do offer that because every summer you get a chance to create an opportunity where you get to see a different engineering resource. So I think the idea of doing co-op is so important, and whether you do that in your summers or whether you do that formally through your Waterloo program, it's so important. And it's not just important to get experience. You're not really getting any useful experience. What you're doing is you're figuring out for yourself what I like. And so I think if you can devote one of those co-op terms to a startup or something you're building on your own, the better, because you can get to see what that environment's like. Some people will never like a startup environment. It's super unpredictable, it's super high risk, it's work all the time, it's absolutely no forgiveness for when things happen in your life that don't time out well. It's a really intense career path. And so to know that before you start is probably a good thing then to know as you're doing it. But I think that, and then I think that the one thing that Queens does provide is they provide a really good chance to get involved with student government and actually having the autonomy to run certain things. And so I think that that's kind of an opportunity that you can't get at Waterloo because of this 4-month in, 4-month out structure. But here was a huge part of me developing leadership and me developing a team and me getting to work on a project that lasted for more than 1 year. But you know what? Honestly, we've hired people from Waterloo and we've hired people from Queens, and they're both awesome.
I'm the better brother that chose to come to Queens.
Are you guys brothers? Oh yeah. A what? Oh, that's cool.
Do you think needs to be done to take this crazy idea and put it into the real world and make a difference? What's the next step? Engineering can be done, but there's a lot of other factors that are a bit out of our control. So what's the comment?
I generally have a rule about commenting about things I don't know very much, and I actually I've seen some of the initial sketches and I understand what the Hyperloop is, but I don't actually know what are the big blockers right now. So I would love to tell you more, and hopefully when Queens brings Elon Musk back, he can answer that question for you guys.
Okay, well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions, but I just wanted to say thank you to Michele once again for joining us here this afternoon. Let's give her a big
guys.